In this episode, I'd like to try to explain as clearly as I can, however clearly that might be, what is meant by conscious suffering, or what is meant by the art of suffering. Now, the first thing we could say upon hearing anything about the art of suffering is, no thanks, buddy. I don't want that. I don't want the art of suffering. I want just to make it go away. It's the fixing I want, not the fixing of suffering, not the art of suffering. So if that's our reaction, that's fair enough. But it's another department that we need in that case. Obviously, we don't need the art of suffering department or the conscious suffering department. We're looking for something different, so we have to go to another store. However, often enough, we go around all the shops and all the supermarkets and all the stores, and we can't find the thing that we're looking for, despite having looked for it. And then if this happens, if we do the rounds and we don't get what we're looking for, which is the technology of fixing suffering, then we come right back to where we started, and perhaps this time we might be more interested in the art of suffering. After all, if we can't get rid of suffering, then we might as well learn to suffer well instead of suffering badly. Whatever the hell suffering well means. That could be a slightly odd kind of a concept. After all, no one ever comes up to us and says, "Hey buddy, you suffering well there?" And then you could reply, "Not really. Not at all." But then again, you could be suffering well, and that's something else. You could say, "Yep, I'm suffering well." Which doesn't mean you're not suffering, of course. So, if we take as our starting off point this idea that neurotic torment of whatever type or colour, whatever type of neurotic suffering it is that we suffer from, that it's all caused by taking on too much responsibility. So we'll just take that as a starting off point and see where that gets us. So this being the case, the first question that I'm going to ask is, okay, how do I not take on too much responsibility? Or how do I not take on responsibility for life if it's taking on responsibility for life itself that's causing me to get so knotted up? And this question straight away is very interesting, because this question straight away is taking on responsibility. We're doing the same old thing as ever, because that's what we do. We always do the same old thing. That's kind of normal. So we're doing the same old thing because I am, by asking the question, how do I stop taking on too much responsibility? I'm taking on responsibility for not taking on responsibility. So that doesn't undo the glitch, it just adds another fold or another twist in it. Now I'm taking on responsibility for not taking on so much responsibility, and that's no better at all. It's actually worse. So you can see that it's a very natural inclination to get some kind of an insight, such as this insight about taking on responsibility for life itself being a bad idea. because it's about it, because it always backfires on us, because we can't do it, we can't take on responsibility for life itself. It's kind of too big a thing for us. So we get this insight, and we could try and turn it into a therapy and then deliberately not take on responsibility, and that doesn't work. So the art of suffering has nothing to do with taking on responsibility of any sort. But then if I don't take on responsibility for taking on too much responsibility, how does this thing work? And the first thing we can say is, well, if I see that I'm taking on responsibility for not taking on responsibility, if I can see that, then maybe I won't. Maybe I'll catch myself and just have a bit of a smile to myself and say, I'm not going to do that. So I'm taking on responsibility for too much, but I'm not taking on responsibility for stopping myself. And so straight away we've made a start. So that's an example or an illustration of the art of suffering. And so if we were going to put this in some sort of basic or essential way, what we could say is that when I'm in a state of mental pain, anything I do to try to alleviate or fix or escape from that pain turns into an exacerbation of the pain. So that's the core principle right there. Now, understanding that core principle isn't a help in a technical way, because as we will discover very quickly, we can't stop trying to do something to get out of the pain. It might sound like we can to someone who's just sitting in an armchair reading about it or thinking about it, but we can't. If you make the experiment of trying, you will see that straight away what's happening is that you're involuntarily trying to get out of it, trying to escape, trying to fix, trying to alleviate the suffering. And if you're strong-minded enough, you can say, no, I'm not going to, and you can deliberately call a halt and kind of freeze yourself so you don't try to get out of the suffering. But in that case, as Alan Watts says, your deliberate attempt not to do anything so as to get out of the suffering is really just doing something to get out of the suffering, so it's the same thing. So that's not going to work. So having an understanding of that means that we can now, instead of wasting our time trying to stop deliberately trying to exit the pain or escape from the pain, instead of wasting any time trying to make a therapy of it or a technique of it or a method of it, we can put all our attention on noticing ourselves trying to escape and not trying to stop ourselves trying to escape, or not evaluating ourselves doing this and thinking, oh no, I'm doing the wrong thing, I'm trying to escape from the pain and that's terrible because it's going to mean there's going to be more pain, and therefore I'm doing the wrong thing, which is an action of the mind or a movement of the mind. So it's positive. Evaluating is positive. Noticing that I'm doing the wrong thing is a positive. I'm overlaying everything with my ideas about what should or should not be the case, or which takes up all the space. So if I can clearly see that all these attempts to get an angle on what's going on are taking up space and not allowing me to be conscious, then seeing that immediately translates into having a bit of space there. And that's what is helpful, to have a bit of space, which comes about spontaneously as soon as we stop struggling in all possible ways. So as I've said, I'm always going to be struggling. I'm still struggling. I can't stop myself struggling, but at least I can stop struggling not to struggle, or I can stop struggling in the sense of thinking that it's wrong to be struggling. Now, I can't do that deliberately, but if I can clearly understand this principle, it will happen that I will stop betting so much money on that horse. Because you wouldn't bet money on a horse you can see isn't going to stand a chance in the race. So if there's a horse there with no legs, you're not going to bet on it. And this is a horse with no legs. So straight away, we have the space then to observe ourselves struggling to try and escape from the pain that we're in. So already this is a very different situation. The orientation has changed a lot because as a result of there being awareness in the situation now. When it's all out struggling, which can include struggling not to struggle, or struggling not to struggle against your struggling, or however many tears we put on it, then consciousness is born, awareness is born. Awareness can never come into the picture when there's wall-to-wall struggling. That's how awareness gets extinguished. And all there is this bull-headed mechanical straining for something, where the straining itself makes sure that we never actually get what we're straining for, because the way to get it isn't through straining. The way to get to freedom or some kind of tranquility isn't through straining. We can never strain for tranquility, obviously enough. But the bull-headed mind doesn't see this, because it's operating on its own, like a runaway piece of machinery, and there's no consciousness there. So think a mind on its own is a disaster. Like any big piece of machinery, when there's no actual human being governing it in some way or watching what it's doing. So that puts us into this situation where we're doing the stuff that we always do. We're trying all of our tricks and we're doing all of the stuff. But we're not constantly telling ourselves that to be in pain is wrong, or that to be trying to escape from pain is wrong. We're not telling ourselves that. So straight away, because we're not telling ourselves that, there's peace. There's a bit of peace there as well. And it may not sound like a hell of a lot, but it is when you're in that situation of being in an acute suffering and you suddenly got this little bit of peace. It really does make an awful lot of difference. And the difference it makes is that we're now in the situation of consciously suffering. So we're actually witnessing our own lives. We're there with ourselves, or we're present with ourselves, or we're there being a witness to ourselves. So as soon as we do this, we've changed the dynamics in a really big way. And it never was the case that by being clever enough I could stop the suffering. But that doesn't mean that the suffering is something I'm condemned for in perpetuity, which is what the thinker mind, in its helpful way, always tells us. It absolutely always gets, every opportunity it gets, it'll tell us this pain-filled state of mind is yours in perpetuity. It's just trying to help us along with it and make us feel a bit better about it. Now it'll either say you're going to be stuck in this forever unless you act now and do the right thing, which is the first thing it says, and then later on, when we haven't been able to do the right thing because there is no right thing, instead of that it'll change its tune a bit and it'll just say you're going to be stuck like this forever. Basically you're screwed. According to the doctrine of the thinking mind. It's a great character, the thinking mind, when it comes to suffering. It tries very hard and impatiently to fix it, and when it can't, it condemns you out of hand. It totally and utterly rubbishes you, condemns you, puts you down, which isn't going to make you feel any better, and you didn't feel any good in the first place. So it's important just to kind of maybe go over that a few times, just to really clear up any misunderstanding about this, that the thinking mind is not what you want on the job. It really isn't. In the first place, impatiently trying to fix it because it can't bear the thing not being fixed is not helpful, it aggravates it. And in the second case, or in the second phase of its activities, when it can't fix it and it starts rubbishing you and writing you off, that's not good either. So the first thing it does isn't good, the second thing it does isn't good. And that's all it does. They never do anything else apart from that. So it is important to stress that again and again and again, because we keep on year after year thinking the thinking man is the right man for the job, the thinking mind is the right man for the job because it's going to get us out of this hole. And it isn't, because it got us in the hole. Its activities got us in the hole, and its activities will deepen the hole. So that's good, we can be clear about that. And when we're not taking direction from the thinking mind, then we're actually experiencing our lives. I'm actually experiencing my life as it's unfolding. And even though that may not feel great, and it may feel terrible, I'm doing the most I could ever do, and I'm also back on the correct path, even though, having said that, I know I should be careful about saying things like right and correct, because that is a term which the mind uses. But when I'm present in my own life without looking for a shortcut, then that's when I'm starting to work with the pain in a sincere and wholehearted way. I'm not trying to shirk it. I'm not trying to get to some point where I can throw the burden down or give the burden to someone else. I'm actually working with it. And to work with pain, to work with suffering, mental suffering, to learn how to do that is to learn how to live. And the two are indistinguishable. So can happen then is that through living this part of my life, which is a part of my life I don't want to live because it's so painful. So I don't want to live this part of my life, and I walk away from it at every opportunity. But when I do that, I always come back to the same place, and that can go on as long as we keep at it. So when I stop rejecting this part of my life and walking away from it, or handing it over to someone else to fix, then I'm living it. And when I live that part of my life that I don't want to live, and that's so difficult to live, then I find that I've learned to live the rest of my life as well. So the cure for the pain is in the pain, just to quote Rumi yet again. And this is a hard enough argument to articulate or point to make, even though it is at the same time very simple. The simplicity of it is beyond us. So it's beyond us when we're dependent upon the thinking mind. The simplicity of the longissima via, the long road, is simply that as has been said, that the road or the path reveals itself to us as we walk it. So we don't have to take any responsibility for working out what the right path is or what the right road is. We don't have to worry about taking the wrong road, or are we on the wrong road, or did we take the wrong turn? Because the only principle is the path reveals itself to us all by its own as we walk it. And that is the essence of the art of suffering. And that's what being on the longissima via is all about. And being on the longissima via might sound a bit fancy or highfalutin, but it just means living our lives as they come. Okay, thanks for listening.